Randy, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for joining me. You have an advantage, I think, over a lot of folks that you have insight into artificial intelligence operations and tactics and so on in the commercial sector as well as the public sector. Give me a kind of a compare contrast on what you're seeing organizations on both sides of that fence doing with AI right now.
Sure. First off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's really interesting. So from an AI perspective, the things that are driving the commercial side of these large language models, right? So this is very hot topic. And if you look at the companies that are driving this, you have companies like OpenAI, and Anthropic. These are kind of companies that have doubled their valuation over the last year, where it's been really hard to drive that type of market adoption. So these are the guys that are actually building the large language models. Underneath of that, you then have these kind of new breed of AI clouds that are being built specifically just for these large language models. So companies like CoreWeave and G42. And then underneath that, you have companies that are building compute and GPUs for this, like NVIDIA. And then you have data platform companies like Vast that are building, the back-end architecture for this. And if you think about AI, the most important thing with AI is data. And having fast access to all of your data is really where things happen, and from multiple geographic locations as well. You have to draw from all the IoT and all those type of architectures. And so the large language models are nice. How that relates then back to the federal government, there's a slew of things that have to be automated that we just don't have enough people. And if you look at this community, we just don't have enough people to protect the homeland, right? And so whether it's intrusion detection from a cyber analytics perspective, and the amount of attacks that we're getting on all of our networks, all of our critical infrastructure is happening every second of every day, till the end of time. And so we have to automate and use artificial intelligence and machine learning in order to get ourselves a tactical advantage against our adversaries. And so those are some of the things that we're seeing. We're also seeing a lot of digital twin work where, people are looking at, trying to look at we have this Apache helicopter, and we want to know when the most likely time that this is going to, a component's going to fail, so that we can have, be ready in order to fix these things as fast as possible. And so you see that. We see a lot of digital twins for mission planning. So if you can take satellite imagery and build 3D models out of it, and you can have our the folks in the field, the operators that are doing these missions, and they can run through this virtually, and they know where they have to exfil from and all the little details, and they can train virtually. Then when they get there, they know they've seen it already, and they can see kind of where they're going. So there's definitely some really interesting capabilities that are coming from the commercial into federal, and we're seeing a ton of it. And so I think when you really look at, we're at the infancy of artificial intelligence. The commercial sector typically runs a little bit faster than federal. I think this is kind of a known thing, right? But there's a lot of really interesting prototypes that are going on. And so I see really big things for AI and machine learning inside of the federal government over the next, let's call it, 3 to 5 years, as all of these technologies mature. But to the same notion as the workforce matures on the federal side as well. And so there's a lot of agencies that are doing some really, really interesting stuff, whether it's healthcare, places like NIH, doing all kinds of great work from National Cancer Institute to Center for Information Technology inside of NIH. These people are just doing fantastic healthcare work. And a lot of that is AI related, right? And so again, if you could pull doctors out of the path of looking at MRIs or CT scans or whatever, you can train machines to do this work, and it just makes a better society, really. And so,
We have less than a minute left. What sectors of the commercial world would you tell government leaders to look at? Financial services, you mentioned healthcare and others. Are there particular sectors that are doing things that are applicable, especially to what people do in the government?
I think so. I think so certainly from a financial perspective, we have a lot of high frequency trading firms, and like we need some people to keep an eye on these folks, right? And so we need the government to be running at the same pace that these commercial companies do. So yeah, I think on the finance side for sure. Certainly from the healthcare perspective, looking at the different pharma organizations and relating that back to FDA. I think DOE is very much at the forefront of a lot of this, of trying to make sustainable energy and things of this nature. Candidly, there's a lot of companies out there that are, building these technologies kind of outside of the traditional federal systems integrator. And so having those people, looking at people that are building components, whether it's, somebody like a Boeing or a Lockheed or somebody that's building planes and things like this, I think a lot of that really, rolls back into the federal government in a couple different ways. So I think those are some pieces. And yeah, I think that's a couple of big ones. And then obviously from a defense perspective, especially from a cyber analytics perspective, looking at these big hyperscalers and how they protect their AI models. Because not only do you have to protect the data that you're training these models on, but think about how useful those models would be to some of our adversaries. So it's not just about having fast access to the data, you also have to protect it, and it has to be, encrypted and making sure the right people are touching the right things. So I think if you look at these big hyperscalers and what they're building and the security that they've put in, I think, the federal government can take some really good lessons from some of these people that are building at scale AI clouds. And security is, candidly the number one thing that I worry about all the time, but especially with the models and the data. And, the government really needs to look at that as well, because, AI is new for pretty much everybody, right? These new AI clouds are relatively, in the last 12 months, they've built these things out. And so it's new for everybody, but that security piece, I think, is really, especially for this community, right? And so being able to not only have access to all this data with a big, large data platform, but also securing that data. And I think that's, the number one thing if I was looking at it.
I appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining me.
Yep, absolutely.